This great solemnity of Corpus Christi, or the body and blood of Christ, enables us to meditate upon the sublime gift of the Holy Eucharist found in the context of the Church. Already in the Old Testament, as our first reading points out, we see this most holy sacrament prefigured in the offering of the bread and wine by the king-priest Melchizedek. Melchizedek is a somewhat strange figure. King of Salem, he appears on this one occasion and then he disappears, and we hear nothing again about Melchizedek. Therefore, by contrast, the Church has always said he prefigures Christ, who has no beginning and has no end. And so the high priest, Jesus, is in the line of Melchizedek. Our own King and our priest, Jesus Christ, gives us his body and blood through the signs of bread and wine. St. Paul's letter today, the second reading, his letter to the Corinthians, is the oldest New Testament description we have regarding the Eucharist. And St. Paul states that Christ took bread, and after he had given thanks, broke it, and he said, "This is my body that is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And so the Church has done just that for 2,000 years. She has offered this Holy Eucharist and will do so as long as the Church exists on earth. The Holy Eucharist is not simply a meal. Rather, the Holy Eucharist is a great feast where Christ's sacrifice becomes present to us each time it is celebrated on the altar. To remember in the Scriptures is to make present once again God's saving reality. It is the risen Lord Jesus who presides over every Eucharist in the person of the priest ordained to holy orders, who stands in the place of Christ in persona Christi, or in the person of Christ. And Jesus feeds us with himself through the hands of the priest who consecrates the bread and wine. This is God's very life given to us. This new covenant revealed in the blood of Christ is renewed, therefore, whenever the Holy Mass is celebrated. The Eucharist is the source and summit of all Christian worship. Thus, this eating and this drinking is also directed towards the formation of the Church into a believing community of love, a foreshadowing of the Last Supper when Christ himself instituted the sacred priesthood and the Holy Eucharist. Our Holy Gospel today recounts that great event when Christ in the wilderness multiplies bread and fish to feed over 5,000 people. It is seen, as it was, as a great miracle, and yet it was merely a multiplication of physical food to heal the physical hunger of the people. Jesus thus brings the crowds prefiguratively into his new covenant in love, into the new heavenly banquet which he will institute on Holy Thursday, a banquet which will never end, a banquet which will always satisfy our spiritual longing. At every Mass, we are fed with Christ's body and blood, his soul and divinity, which is contained both in the bread and in the wine, and we are formed by this sacrament into a union of love. In this act of love, Christ gives himself to us, and we are called upon in turn to give ourselves and our lives entirely for Christ, to turn our lives over to God as a sacrifice of praise and thanksgiving. The understanding of the Eucharist developed over the ages until the High Middle Ages in the 1200s, when we come to St. Thomas Aquinas. And St. Thomas Aquinas is responsible for the text and the music to a great part for this great solemnity of Corpus Christi. He had written eloquently. He had developed the notion of transubstantiation, and the Church, embracing that theology, then gave great celebration on this feast to the presence of Christ in the Blessed Sacrament. St. Thomas Aquinas, responsible for the hymns and prayers of this feast, wrote the following: "Very bread, good shepherd, tend us. Jesus, of your love, befriend us. You refresh us, you defend us. Your eternal goodness send us in the land of life to see." St. Thomas was a great mystic, and St. Thomas instituted this great devotion as we know this feast of Corpus Christi. May this most holy and precious Eucharist, my brothers and sisters, give us a foretaste of a world to be transformed into the divine love of God. In turn, may we love and always cherish this most holy gift, receiving it with reverence as we continue on our journey towards the fullness of God's kingdom.